Okay, good afternoon, everyone. All right, so today's topic is what is a really good consumption? Now, this is well, basically, I had a long conversation with the late Venerable Master a few years ago, and he said that it's really important to talk about the embedded theory of traditional Chinese philosophy and traditional Chinese culture in economic education. So this course essentially is the result of a few years of research in this particular area. It's a combination of economics and traditional Chinese culture. So today's topic is about consumption. Now, there are many topics in this area, so this is one of them. And I think the motivation for this topic is that we are living in a materialistic world, right? We envy the rich, apparently, at least most people, and we want things for ourselves. So it's a rare virtue for us modern people to practice modesty, to live in a parsimonious life, if you like. So we might be under the impression that Confucius will tell us to spend as little as possible, right? And the ethical life is more important than economic life. Well, of course it is, but the traditional Chinese philosophy and teaching they're very practical. So on the one hand, it aims to lift human development to the highest level using the highest ethical standard. But on the other hand, it doesn't forbid a necessary human life, but quite the contrary. It teaches people the correct way of life. So more specifically to today's topic, what does traditional teaching have to say about consumption in the modern world, and where we have so many things to buy and to enjoy? That's our focus today. Now, for us ordinary people, we simply cannot live without material consumption, can we? I mean, Confucius said a series of practical consumption rule with philosophical explanations to help us to understand and to maintain happiness. And we know that modern people like you and I don't like rules, do we? I mean, especially when it comes to personal life. But as long as we give it some thought, we'll quickly realize that rules are not designed to constrain us. It only makes us free from unnecessary suffering. And this is because these rules are consistent with our nature. They're not arbitrary. So if I can give an analogy, if I may, we can think about consumption rules as air traffic control, right? The air traffic control tower usually directs flights operation based on a number of indicators, including busyness, altitude, speed, the weather, right? Emergency situations, and so on. And nobody seems to complain about these rules because we know that these rules are for people's safety and smooth operation of the airport. And without these air traffic control, the airspace would soon turn into a chaos and a graveyard, I'm afraid. But what about consumption rule? Well, the logic is exactly the same. We need consumption rules, not because we like to constrain ourselves, but because we don't want to hurt ourselves. Another question is how can we possibly get hurt by consumption? Well, that's a great question to ask. I think a Chinese proverb described this situation very, very well. It says that people never turn back until they bump their heads on the wall, and never cry until they see their own demise. You've heard about that, I think. So I think this is, nicely proved by many wars, right? By multiple financial crises in recent decades. And in fact, the financial crisis is a result of the endless want of bonuses and wealth that led to the excessive trading and cheating. And what is the motivation of wealth? Well, that is consumption, isn't it? So in this seminar, we'll consult the ancient sages. What is the best and most harmless way of consumption? And the best consumption pattern is by no means a skimpy one. The traditional Chinese culture values the concept of middle way, right? The middle way. Too much on the left, too much to the left is just as bad as too much to the right. And I think a good consumption pattern is one that goes along with human nature. So it's not only beneficial to oneself, but also to the society around us. Okay, so now let's start our discussion with the understanding of the middle way of consumption. Okay, the middle way of consumption. Now, if we divide consumption patterns through roughly into two categories, one is extravagant, and the other is parsimony. So extravagant represents spending just way too much, right? Much more than necessary. And the parsimony represents spending way below the proper level. In the Record of Rites, Confucius approved neither of them. No, neither of them. And he used two examples to explain his points. Extravagant consumption pattern is represented by, and not only, by Guan Zhong. Okay, Guan Zhong served as the chancellor of the state of Qi during the spring and autumn period from 770 BC to 476 BC. That's the period. And he was a very successful reformer, and he helped the state of Qi to become the economic superpower of the time. But Guan Zhong also had an extravagant lifestyle. So Confucius described that despite of his position as a great officer, right? He wasn't a king, he wasn't a prince, he was just an officer. But Guan Zhong had quite a lifestyle. According to Confucius, he had carvings on the square vessels for holding the grain of his offerings. He had red ornaments for his cap, and he set up a screen where he lodged on the way and had a stand of earth on which the cups he held he had used in giving a feast were replaced. And he also had hills carved on the capitals of his pillars and pondweed on the lower pillars supporting the rafters. So Confucius admitted that Guan Zhong was a very worthy officer. All right, very worthy, very intelligent officer. But it takes some effort for his superiors to distinguish themselves from Guan Zhong. I mean, to put it differently, you won't be able to tell who is Guan Zhong and who is the boss, if you see them. So, but you see, Confucius wasn't condemning his lifestyle itself. It's not about the lifestyle itself, but he was concerned about the social consequence of his lifestyle. And the reason is, for the society to be in a harmonious state, it is really important for different social groups of people to find their place. And this involves having the right consumption pattern, you see. Consumption should fit into social positions. Okay, it should fit in social positions. And so it creates order. It creates respect and prevents usurpation. And this is not only recognized by Confucius in China, but also by the British economist Nassau Williams Sr. in the 17th century. So from the pattern of consumption, according to Confucius, it seems rather difficult to distinguish who is Guan Zhong, who was an officer, and who was the king or the prince. And such a lifestyle confuses people. And more importantly, it triggers a social tendency of valuing material above honor. Okay, and that's a big problem. So that's extravagant lifestyle. But Confucius also illustrated an overly parsimonious lifestyle with Yanping Zhong. And I think was it Callie or Catherine talked about Yanping Zhong earlier before the break. Now Yanping Zhong was a successful diplomat of the state of Qi during the late spring and autumn period. So what does Yanping Zhong, what does this consumption look like? Well, Confucius said during the ancestral remembrance ceremony, Yan Pingzhong used only very little sacrifice. There was not even nearly enough to cover the size of the dish. And again, Confucius gave full credit to his intellectual ability, but also recognized that his overly strict lifestyle put extreme pressure on his peers and subordinates. So from a social perspective, this is not productive. Now, although consumption is, arguably a personal choice, no doubt, a superior man, a virtuously superior man considers the social impact and externality of his action as well. And externality is a very important economic term, but it's usually about cost and benefit, but rather than ethics. So Confucius said, a superior man will not encroach on the observances of those above him, nor put difficulties in the way of those below him. Okay. In other words, conditional on personal financial ability, consumption should follow the rule of moderation, or the middle way, at least under the circumstances where there are, obvious social impact. So this is why the system of rights is important and must be carefully considered. I mean, after all, we're not living in a jungle, right? We're not living on our own. We're responsible for what we do and the subsequent consequential social impact. Confucius also reminded us that the system of right is very flexible and we must adapt to different situations. So the appropriate level of right is a relative term, is a relativity. And there is always an optimal level given the situation, and any deviation from the optimal level would be inferior, would be worse. Now, to illustrate this point, we need to introduce another important concept in the theory of Confucian consumption. And this is the distinction between self-spending and spending for the society. So self-spending and social spending. Okay, now let's have a look. Now, from the surface, self-spending is for our own pleasure and need, while social spending is for the greater good of the society around us. Confucius illustrated this difference very well using a reference of Emperor Yu, or Yu the Great. Okay, he was the founder of the Xia dynasty, and he lived around early the 2nd century BC. So Confucius said, that I can find no flaw in the character of Yu, Emperor Yu. So what did he do? Well, he used himself coarse food and drink, very low quality food and drink, but displayed the utmost filial piety towards the spirits. His ordinary garments were poor, but he displayed the utmost elegance in his sacrificial cap and apron. He lived in a low, mean house, but expended all his strength in the ditches and water channels and things like that. And I can find nothing like a flaw in Yu. A perfect man. Now let's have a look at this paragraph from a different angle. In terms of personal food consumption, Emperor Yu kept it at a very low quality level, minimum quality. It was just enough to prevent hunger, and there's nothing fancy about that. But during the occasion of ceremony of the spirit, Emperor Yu spared no expense, right, and made sure that the offering was of the highest quality. But it wasn't for parading his wealth, right? The ceremony of spirit was important for the education and unity of the society. It's for educational purpose. So as a way to spread benefit to the wider public, Emperor Yu was, in fact, very generous. But this is hugely different from his own consumption. Also, Emperor Yu was, he set a very low standard for his own personal clothes consumption, right? He put on low quality garments for himself during normal times, and yet he kept his most elegant clothes and adornment for the sacrificial ceremony. Emperor Yu was also well known for his effort and achievement in flood management. He was a leader in public projects and prevented the flood by water control. I mean, even for modern society, flood management is no easy task at all. Emperor Yu spent 13 years living in the wild with the people, studying the landform, digging water channels, and eventually diverted the flood into rivers and ocean. But in contrast to his selflessness in public welfare, he chose a very small house for his own accommodation. So now we can see that food, clothes, shelter, these are the three necessities of life. And if we use them to describe the characters of Emperor Yu, we may conclude that his standard is very low. But Confucius applauded it. And what's the reason for that? It's because when judging Yu from the viewpoint of social expenditure, such as infrastructure, right, public work and religious sacrifices, Yu was very liberal, and he set a great example for the society. So this is why Confucius praised that I can find nothing like a flaw in Yu. So, well, very interesting, isn't it? I mean, we can see that the system of rights is not rigid at all. It serves different purposes on different occasions. So for the self, a careful and measured consumption style can keep our growing desire under control. And this helps us to maintain stability in the mind. In contrast, a good public welfare is absolutely essential to maintain social order and harmony. So the money and energy spent in this area should be made adequate for the need of the people. Okay, so it's all about finding the right balance. Now, having understood the basic meaning of extravagance and parsimony and in the middle way, for the rest of the seminar, we'll show the personal standard of consumption. So it really is our topic today, the personal standard of consumption and the problem of deviating from that standard. Okay, now in order to demonstrate the sage's teaching properly, we select two extremes of consumption pattern, two extremes. One is the extravagant side of consumption, and the other is obviously parsimonious side of consumption. Now, most of us can probably guess that neither of them is good, but just how bad is it? The problem is that there are indeed a lot of people standing on the two extremes of the scale, and I guess our human nature usually leads us to an extreme mentality without knowing. So this is in fact quite relevant to most of us, I believe. So first of all, let's have a look at the problem of extreme consumption pattern. Okay, luxurious and extravagant consumption. Now, regarding the downside of luxurious lifestyle, the Canon of History, or the Venerable Book, it's called the Venerable Book also, uses children's mentality as an example. It describes a picture like this: a luxurious son, or children in general, will never understand the diligent laboring of the parents. In other words, parents will find it very difficult to make children aware of how difficult life can be if the children are raised in a luxurious environment. And, this is because they're used to it, right? They're used to it. Now, the problem of being soaked in an easy lifestyle for a long time is that the children will become absolutely useless and disrespectful and disordered. So when their parents ask them to do some work and make an effort, they will throw contempt on their parents and say, those old people have heard nothing and know nothing. I don't know how, who have children in our audience, but does this sound familiar to you at all? I mean, you might be surprised that disrespectful children, said just the same thing 2,500 years ago as we do today. But this is really not their fault. This is really up to the parents what kind of person they want their children to be. But this quote of Confucius, this quote is not only about children's education. In fact, it's what the Duke of Zhou said to himself as a reminder of being a ruler or a sovereign. Okay, and he said, as a superior man, he must not indulge in luxurious ease. He must understand the painful toil of hard work, and only this way can he comprehend how the general public depends on this toil for their support. So Duke of Zhou was reminding himself that without understanding hard work, he would be like one of those spoiled children, not up for the task and the responsibility that falls upon him, really. So in this regard, the Duke specifically warned himself that the success of a career as a king is directly related to his ability to endure hardship. And I guess a necessary condition for his endurance is avoiding an extravagant lifestyle, isn't it? He said, enjoying ease from their birth, they did not know the painful toil of sowing and reaping. Pretty much the princess, right? And had not heard of the hard labors of the lower people, or the common people. They sought for nothing but excessive pleasure, and so not one of them had long life. And this also means not one of them was able to rule the country for a long time. Now, if we have a look at the history record, such as the Spring and Autumn, the Spring and Autumn annals record many stories to condemn extravagance. It's all over the place. For example, it records the decoration of the palace of the Duke Zhuang of Lu. Basically, the Duke painted. The Duke is not the emperor, by the way, right? It was one of the vassal kings under the House of Zhou. So the Duke painted the pillars of his temple to red color. Now, that was a wrong thing to do in the old days, because there were written rules about the color coding system, which was used to distinguish different classes. Okay, so the designated color for the Duke was black, and red for the king, the Zhou king. And well, that's the system of rights with regard to the consumption of building. Okay, and the Duke was condemned for using the color of a higher class because it would cause confusion and an atmosphere of non-compliance. And by the way, when we study history, okay, we need to put ourselves in a situation of the corresponding time and era and place and culture. Although we say that the color coding system, or the the class-based color system, is obviously no longer in use today. But we could think of an equivalent situation where, let's say, a military sergeant walks around the barrack and give a speech in a uniform of an admiral, right? Or an undergraduate student wearing a gown designated to the holders of doctorates. And both of these consumptions would cause great confusion, and there would be a lack of respect. Also recorded in the Spring and Autumn annals is that the Duke carved the rafters of the temple. Now that was considered inappropriate as well, not only because it was too luxurious for the Duke, but also because it required labor and a lot of money without really obvious benefit to the people. So these heavy works were essentially paid using government tax income. So an extravagant life of a government official is really a waste of time, a waste of people's income. Now, from Confucius' writing, there are, I guess, many examples of condemnation against the evil and the evil of luxury and extravagance. Okay, for example, in the Analects, Confucius condemned the head of the Ji family, Ji Sun family. Okay, because he had 8 rows of pantomimes in his courtyard. It was a kind of a dance. Okay, so this, this is the highest standard of pantomimes, and only the emperor himself is entitled to have 8 rows. So the Ji family used the rights of the emperor. And again, in the same chapter, it is recorded that the three powerful families, the Ji family, as I mentioned, Meng Sun family, and Shusun's family used a song which was reserved for the emperor himself during the sacrificial ceremony. And I guess on another occasion, Confucius criticized Guanzhong because he appointed so many officers, but they sat around doing absolutely nothing. And Guanzhong, also decorated his house in many ways that was, very similar to the royal palace. So with regard to these issues, Confucius said, let me check. Yes, he said that if these things are allowed, then what else might not be allowed? Now let's talk about these bad consumptions, okay, in a bit more detail. Now, on the surface, this leads to the mismatch between class and consumption standard, but the deeper meaning is that the potential chaos and the rise of competition. So, well, but in English there is a specific phrase for this situation, and have you heard about keeping up with the Joneses? Keeping up with the Joneses, right? It refers primarily to people who focus on appearances, right? Especially when it comes to appearing well off. So what Confucius was doing was to regulate consumption according to social order, because extravagance is effectively the same as usurpation. Now, having said all of these, you might wonder, oh gosh, am I not allowed to enjoy myself? Are you saying that as long as we buy something expensive or indulge ourselves in some enjoyable way, I'm doomed? Well, we must understand that the ruin of a country or the demise of a company is not directly resulted from consumption itself. Rather, it is resulted from the lack of attention to business and a loss of self-discipline, which are stimulated by the high consumption pattern. For example, the former CEO of Bear Stearns, some of you may have heard about Bear Stearns, it was one of the largest investment banks on Wall Street. So the former CEO of Bear Stearns, Jimmy Cain, he was well known for his backslapping, hard drinking, or high living style, and he was known as a risk taker in both business and personal life. In 2007, and you know what happened then, it was the financial crisis, wasn't it? In 2007, he was worth over $1 billion, and he wanted everybody to know it. So every Thursday afternoon, after the stock market closed, he would board a private helicopter just a few blocks away from his Manhattan office and fly off to his country house on the New Jersey shore for weekends of bridge and golf game. In November 2007, the Wall Street Journal carried a front page story which portrayed Jimmy Cain as an absentee landlord who was always out of touch on his golf game and bridge tournament, while his company, Bear Stearns, was in crisis. So next year, on Sunday, March the 16th of 2008, Bear Stearns was taken over by JP Morgan at a price of $2 a share, as compared to $170 a share just 1 year earlier. And interestingly, I was able to witness this in my office because I was working in the banking industry before during the time. So we can see, hopefully we can see that luxurious life is not a crime itself on its own. Although the canon of history condemned luxury, it doesn't go to the extreme. It put great emphasis on the rationality of consumption. From the government perspective, it says that the officials should not live the life of luxury, but after they have first understood the painful toil of sowing and reaping, they may then be allowed luxury. And so they can understand the suffering of the inferior people. And now, if you think about this, this is quite true, isn't it? Sometimes a certain degree of luxury is kind of necessary for the high official. For example, it is appropriate, right, for the prime minister to live in a, or the president to live in a presidential palace. It also has, business function. And it's equally necessary for the officials to use high standard cars and other means of transportation for both safety and business purpose. But the condition is that they understand the need of the ordinary people first, because if you never understand what they need, it is very difficult for the policymakers to make the right policy, if not possible, if not impossible. But even, for the ordinary people, leisure and luxury have functional use. Once, Zigong, one of the disciples of Confucius, went to what is called the, I think, agricultural festival. Okay, or agricultural sacrifice. As basically, it turned into a drinking festival. And Confucius said, "So, do you like it? What do you think?" And Zigong said, "Well, I don't like it. I don't understand why people are so mad." And Confucius said, "Well, that's because you have never been a farmer before, right? For their 100 days labor in the field, plowing the field, they receive this 1 day enjoyment. And this is what you don't understand. King Wen and King Wu could not keep a bow in good condition if it were always drawn and never relaxed, nor did they leave it always relaxed and never drawn. To keep it now strong and now unstrung was the way of King Wen and King Wu." So Confucius pointed out there is a need for relaxation and indulgence for the hardworking men to maintain stamina, essentially. Right? It's like keeping a bow in good condition. So most of the time people must work, yes, but sometimes they need to relax. And the point here is that indulgence should be reasonable. Now, we have talked about the problem of extravagance and luxury. So should we adopt the other extreme pattern and live a parsimonious lifestyle? Well, Confucius always advocated the middle way, right? And in modern term is called the principle of moderation. And it can also be applied to all aspects of life, including consumption. So as you can imagine, Confucius didn't, condemn frugality or parsimoniousness as severely as he did with extravagance. But there's still a limit. Now, remember, whenever we investigate people's economic life from the perspective of traditional Chinese philosophy, we always consider the social impact of people's economic choice, right? The social impact. I mean, extreme frugality is not good because it's not only, it not only deters consumption, but and economic growth, but it also has an unfavorable ethical and social impact. So generally speaking, when the people are overly frugal and stingy, if you like, their mind tends to be narrow and cruel, and their characters tend to become mean. But the character of the people is something that can be developed and harnessed, in much the same way that the parents teach their children to share their favorite toys, to develop generosity. And generosity is, of course, a crucial character for a person's social relation building. So in order to maintain harmony in social relation, people must be generous to some degree. And so extreme parsimoniousness can lead to unpleasant social relation. And this is why in Confucius teaching, we find that there are plenty of minimum consumption guidelines that require people to abide by in their lives, as long as the conditions allow. So we shouldn't take it lightly and think, oh, of course, as long as I have the money, I'll make sure that I can live a high life. This is unfortunately not about that. It's about having the right consumption up to a high enough standard so that the mind and the body are positively developed. So let's have a look. Let's have a look at the what Confucius mean by that from two different aspects: food and clothes. Okay, food and clothes. And I think that before the break, Kelly mentioned something very nice about Confucius' food consumption. Okay. In the Analects, there's a very interesting paragraph about Confucius' food preparation and his choice of food. Now, in traditional, so we're talking about food, right? We're talking about food. Now, in traditional Chinese medical science, food, has various functions depending on its status, right? And it can serve as medicine, as herbs. The Chinese describe the functionality using heat, cold, yin, and yang, right? Now, for example, ginger. Ginger is of the character of heat. So if you drink ginger soup before you go to bed, you'll most likely sweat during the night. And of course, sometimes it helps to cure a cold. So when Confucius talked about food preparation, is usually from a health perspective. This is even more obvious when Confucius refused to eat meat that had gone bad by observing the smell and the color of the meat, right? Now, a healthy eating style is also related to eating the right food at the right time. And again, in traditional Chinese medical science, food that grows during certain season has a function which harmonizes human body, right? For example, it is good to eat watermelon during the summer because it expels the heat and keeps you hydrated, but not a good idea in the winter, okay? Because watermelon don't grow in the winter, and there's a reason for that. So basically, a chaotic and uncontrolled lifestyle and eating style is simply very harmful. So even for an ordinary person who doesn't pursue a luxurious lifestyle, attention to details in food preparation is desirable. Now, what does this have to do with economics anyway? Well, the system of rights you see in consumption is a kind of external reflection of internal discipline. So when people's minds are calm and function in a harmonious fashion, their behavior shows the same thing. But when they don't, people can actually harness their mind through practicing rights. So from rights to the mind. So the system of rights on the outside can nurture human characters on the inside. Therefore, if rights are considered when making consumption decisions, consumption will not only serve the basic purpose of survival, but respect, right? Respect doesn't come from a jaw-dropping price tag, but only comes from the recognition of higher virtue. So in Confucius' system, social position is directly related to virtue. Although people are born unequally, of course, in terms of wealth and family nobility, right? But people are encouraged to cultivate personal virtue in order to level up, to advance up to a higher social rank. So the design of clothing system reflects social position, and in turn, it also reflects personality. Therefore, different classes or different groups are designated for different clothing style, especially the color. All the officers should be virtuous also, and should be awarded decorations, the right to decorations according to their virtue, right? For example, I'm not going to, because of time constraint, we're not going to go into too much detail. You see, marquises, emperors, barons, great officials, they all have different color system for their robes and clothes, okay? And so we certainly, but we're not trying to copy them, of course, but we can see that the costume in Confucius system is not simple at all, right? It's beautiful, it's complex, it's intricate, and more importantly, it has social function. So the use of clothing system is a mean of respect and reward. So in a way, consumption like this is actually necessary, and you should make that consumption, and it's meaningful. Now, what about today? We're almost the end. We're almost the end. So what about today? What about today? Well, the question is the system of consumption still effective in modern society? Well, if you think about clothes, right, the clothing system, one can argue that, well, the manufacturing of clothes was inadequate in ancient times in terms of insufficient supply of quality materials, lack of good designers, and lack of access to advanced manufacturing technique. But in modern society, because resources are widely available, almost everybody can have access to reasonably good quality clothing. Well, it's probably true that the motivational function of clothes has been greatly diminished. The modern society, as you know, is already filled with materials, and the access to high quality products is almost only differentiated by wealth, not virtue, but just wealth. Therefore, any additional consumption will only generate very limited marginal effect on respect, if at all. Okay. And actually, when we see people who are, financially more capable of consuming high quality or more expensive products, cars, clothes, or whatnot, we don't really think about respect, do we? It doesn't make us improve ourselves in the morality space. In contrast, it triggers a sense of envy, even jealousy. The problem is we can't go back to the color coding system. In fact, we have no system to make personal distinction. So how do we put Confucius' system of the right into practice and suit the modern society? That's the question. Well, in China, if you think about a long history of China, whenever a new dynasty or government was born, the establishment of a complete right of a system of rights for the people is always the first and foremost project of the government. And it's for this particular reason, it never took longer than 5 years for the society to stabilize and prosper again after the change of regime. The Record of Rights says that when establishing states and governing the people, education, instruction must be made a primary object. And it has been the case in China for 5,000 years. So the important thing to realize here is that the sense of the essence of a system of rights is education. The system of rights is itself a form of education, isn't it? And I think the reason why all the ancient sages are worshipped for hundreds of generations is that their teaching transcend time and space, because they all started with self-cultivation first. So even though we no longer have the luxury of convenience, really, to inspire people simply through dress code and the color of the clothes, we still need to teach people the importance of virtue. And more specifically, I think people must know that living a high life, you can live a high life if you want, but living a high life without the comparable virtue and personal quality is a shameful thing to do. It's a shameful thing to do. Nobody's stopping you, but it's shameful. In other words, people should be taught to develop a sort of a dress code system in their mind. Now, in corporate finance, that's my old profession before, there was a simple measure that fit our philosophy, although not perfect, but it sort of fit our philosophy, and it's called pay for performance. Pay for performance. So what it means is that every penny paid to the management must be supported by shareholders' return. And in a more general social setting, the performance refers to personal contribution to the society in terms of both material production and virtue. So a virtuous person can influence many people in a positive way, right? And so when we face the choice of living a luxurious life or not, we need to ask ourselves, do we deserve it? Do we deserve it? What kind of example am I setting for my fellow citizens and friends? And as the leader of the country, even more important, personal behavior and virtue would have an even wider impact on society. And I think that these are all very important standards of consumption that there needs to be revived in today's materialistic and consumption-driven world. So thank you for your time. It's a long presentation. I apologize for that, and I welcome any question. Thank you.